Hey guys, welcome back. Free Tip Friday. I have been getting a question that is just starting to just piss me off. I get this question so much in my comment section and people messaging me on Facebook and emailing me. And the question is, aren't you afraid of expansion and contraction? That's the voice I hear everybody posing the question with. No, I'm not afraid of expansion and contraction. I've never had an issue with expansion and contraction. So I'm just going to explain my take on expansion and contraction of wood. And I'm sure there's going to just be a plethora of experts chiming in the comment section and, take it for what it is. I'm not an expert. But here's my take on expansion and contraction, because it seems that people are just straight up freaked out about expansion and contraction of their wood once they build a project. Now, I will say that wood is a very mysterious beast, and it's constantly moving and doing all sorts of wonderful things that you have to be aware of. But I find that these things, especially shrinkage and expansion and contraction, these things tend to stop almost entirely once the wood is dry. So, what's the number one lesson when building something? Make sure your wood is dry. That means like 12% moisture or less, preferably 10 or less, and your wood is really, really dry. Typically, your house is like 9%. That's kind of like the relative humidity in the air. So what wood tends to do is it tends to mirror the relative humidity in the air. So if it's in an interior environment, your house, which is around 9%, the wood will adjust to about 9%, whether that's your hardwood floor or your furniture or whatever. Now there's a bit of fluctuation from season to season depending on where you live in the world. I will not say that I have any expertise on wood expansion contraction in places other than the Northwest, because in an equatorial environment where there's lots of humidity and tropical rainforests, wood might do completely different things down there. I don't know, I don't live there. Okay, so I'm just talking about here in like the Northwest where we get 4 seasons, summer, fall, spring, winter. Those are the seasons in no particular order. So your home's humidity will change a little bit in the winter, and you will notice that wood, especially like your wood floors, will maybe have a few more squeaks in the summer or in the winter. Things will change because that wood floor is expanding and contracting. But is it expanding and contracting a noticeable amount? Yes, because your floor is moving around and you're hearing a few different squeaks and stuff like that. But you have to understand that a wood floor is a massive surface. So the main time that you need to worry about wood expansion and contraction is when you're dealing with large surface area. There might be an issue with a huge wide tabletop where you have a bunch of boards laminated together. But I find like with my workbench, which is 3 inches thick and I'm 2 feet wide, the wood has contracted maybe a 64th of an inch on either side over the whole thing. So there's pretty much no expansion or contraction. And that was probably just because the wood was stored in a warehouse, which is obviously a dry area, but it wasn't like a heated warehouse. So the wood came at about maybe 12%, and now in my shop here, it's maybe 10%. So it's contracted like a 32nd of an inch overall. So I don't need to worry about my joinery on my ends cracking or breaking apart with expansion and contraction like all these people have been warning me about. So the main area that wood expansion and contraction can screw you over is in hardwood floors. That's why when you're installing a hardwood floor, they say you're supposed to leave like a 3/8 gap around the entire perimeter of the floor, which allows for expansion and contraction. And I can tell you that a wood floor will expand that much, because when you add 100 boards and each one of them is expanding a 64th of an inch from season to season, or worse, contracting after you've installed it, then you can run into a lot of issues. And I've been in houses where people installed their own hardwood floors and they didn't leave gaps around the edges and their floors just like buckled like all over the place. So expansion contraction is a serious issue when you're dealing with hardwood floors. That's why hardwood floor installers were always bring a hardwood floor to a house and leave it stacked up in the house with spacers and stuff like that. They open up the boxes of the hardwood flooring and leave it in the house for up to 3 weeks before installing it, because that just gives it time to acclimatize to that interior moisture content. So obviously the moisture content in wood is critically important, and how do you figure out what that moisture content is? Well, that's where this little bad boy comes into play. This was a really expensive Wagner moisture meter. I think it cost me about $400. But when you work with wood for a living, knowing the moisture content is absolutely critical. So spending the money and getting a good moisture meter, I highly recommend it. The first moisture meter I ever had was this little pin meter. So you pull this thing off and it's got these 2 little pins. You got to stab it into the wood, and then you turn this little dial, and then a little light lights up when it gets to the right moisture content, which is written around the edge here. This was about $100, and that worked well for a while, but I found that I don't want to stab holes, 16th-inch holes into nice wood to get the moisture content, because then those holes are there, and so you're stabbing it in the end grain, and checking the moisture content in the end grain is not always reliable. So you really want to know what the moisture content is in the center area of your boards, and in actually multiple places along the boards. And with a digital super magnetic quantum field thermometer gizmo, this thing measures an area, a large area. I think it's 2.5 inches by 2 inches and 3/4 of an inch deep. And so you just move that along, and it's calculating and using these high-tech calculations and equations to give you your average moisture content. So I have this thing out all the time, and I'm just checking every piece of wood that comes into my shop to be like, hey, is this going to shrink or is it going to expand? What's it going to do? And for the most part, if it's 12% or less, you don't have to worry about it. You can build your furniture and just sleep at night, and you don't have to worry about waking up and having cracks or pops or stuff breaking. That's your tip for this week. Stop asking me about moisture content, because it's not that big a deal. Just work with dry wood. Now, if you're thinking you're going to work with green wood and get away with it, well, be my guest. You build something out of green wood and you take it into your house, it will likely explode. And if it doesn't explode, you will just see unsightly gaps in all your joinery and cracks and checking in the boards, and it's just not a pretty scene at all. So I will link a couple of these moisture meters in my Amazon store, so you can go and check them out there and know which ones that I use and have relied on for a while. And I highly recommend you get a moisture meter if you plan on being a woodworker. If you buy your wood from a hardwood supplier, obviously it's all going to be properly kiln dried and 12% or less. So you don't have to worry. But if you're getting pallet wood, God forbid, or other sources of wood, you're buying old reclaimed timbers. There's all sorts of situations where you can get really good wood for super cheap from other places, but knowing the moisture content, well, you just have to check for yourself. So now let's talk about a few other issues as far as wood orientation and how you can orient the wood in a project to minimize the effects of expansion and contraction. I got this scrap piece of maple here, and you can see that this is what's called a flat sawn piece of wood, because the grain or the growth rings are, for the most part, running flat along the width of the board. So this leaves nice surface growth rings and patterns on the wood with these cathedrals and beautiful just figure on the grain, which is nice. But flat sawn wood will be the most likely to cause you problems with expansion and contraction. Now, why is this? If it's dry, right? Wrong. Wood shrinks and contracts in 3 different ways, 2 of which could be significant. The third way is pretty much not measurable. So the types of wood shrinkage are tangential shrinkage. Now that is shrinkage along the width of the growth ring, like the thickness, and then there's circumferential shrinkage. Now that is the growth ring along the length of the growth ring, as in the circle contracts as it shrinks. And then there's longitudinal shrinkage, which is the length of the wood. Now, you don't need to worry about longitudinal shrinkage because it is almost redundant. It's like immeasurable in most cases. So the other two types of shrinkage being tangential, which is like the thickness, the compression of each growth ring, and then the circumferential. I don't think I'm saying that right and just sounding like an idiot, but you know, it's legit. That's what it's called. It's hard to pronounce, okay? And that is the growth ring contracting on itself. Now, the most amount of shrinkage you will witness is along the circumference of the growth ring. So when you look at a tree and all of its growth rings, when it shrinks, it's going to shrink the most like that. That's why you get checks in the wood, because the growth rings are trying to contract on themselves, but obviously the center of the tree, where the moisture is in the center, that moisture can't escape as quickly as the moisture on the exterior part of the tree, and so the exterior growth rings are trying to contract around a solid core, and the wood cracks because it just can't do it. So when you're dealing with wood that's flat sawn, you're going to see the most amount of expansion and contraction along the circumference of the growth rings. So if you have a whole tabletop of flat sawn boards, that tabletop will be much more likely to expand and contract in a noticeable way than, say, if the wood was oriented like this with vertically sawn boards, or rift sawn, or vertical grain they call it. So that's one of the reasons why vertically sawn or rift sawn wood costs more, because it is more stable. It also eliminates more knots because of the way they saw the wood. So you can find usually more clear wood is rift sawn is usually free of knots, or vertical grain sawn wood is free of knots and completely clear, and so that's why it's a little bit more expensive. But using wood like this is fine, because if you glue all your boards like this, your tabletop is only going to shrink or expand this way a little bit more, and not this way as much. So that's just the basics of wood orientation, is that your wood is going to shrink and contract the most along the length of the ring as opposed to the thickness, if that makes any sense. So whenever possible, use wood that is vertically sawn, or at least orient the wood so that it is vertically sawn. All my tabletop here is 3 inches thick, you know, flat sawn maple, but I oriented it like this in chunks side by side, so that the thickness might change the most, which I don't even care about, but I'm not going to get expansion and contraction this way on my bench top. All right, so I hope that was an awesome knowledge bomb. It definitely was when I discovered that knowledge, and it forever changed me as a woodworker. What was that, my southern drawl? I was forever changed as a woodworker. Just to let you know, I'm discovering all these weird personalities pretty much at the same time you are. So let's just all experience my weirdness together, okay? Just enjoy it, take it for what it is. And if it offends you, I am so pleased to hear that. So that was a lot of information, so just to recap that, the shrinkage you need to worry about is around the circumference of the growth rings. So try whenever possible to orient your growth rings so that they are vertically placed in your project. Then you don't have to worry about expansion, contraction. The other nice thing about these really expensive moisture meters is that they come with a chart, and the calculations or the equations, whatever they use to calculate the moisture content, actually change depending on the density of the wood. So you have softwoods, you have hardwoods, deciduous, you know, evergreen, that sort of stuff. And the density of the wood actually affects the reading of the moisture content. So they have different settings of density ranging from 40 to like 100 on a density scale. And so each species of wood, and they have a whole little booklet that it comes with where it tells you all the different species and what the density ratings are, so that when you're testing, you know, black walnut, you can punch in that density rating, and then obviously it'll be different than, say, Doug fir or spruce or pine, something that's really soft. So you really do get like crazy precision accuracy with the more expensive moisture meter, whereas the little pin meters are mostly just stick the pins in the wood and whatever the moisture is, it is. Which for the most part is still accurate, within 1 or 2% maybe. Pin meter, probably better, probably more realistic, rational option for hobbyists, weekend woodworkers. And then the digital meter for obviously people that do this for a living. So I hope you guys will all just sleep a little bit better tonight. and not have to worry about your projects exploding due to expansion and contraction, okay? Okay? Here's another good rule of thumb to not piss the samurai off is if you have a question about woodworking, please Google it first. Just Google it. That's pretty much where I get all my information. So if you can't get an answer from the ancient wisdom of Google, then you can come and ask me and I'll try and give you whatever information I have. All right, so make sure you're subscribed so that you don't miss these awesome knowledge bombs coming at you every week on Friday. Oh, it's Friday. That's so awesome. The question is, how many hours till happy hour? I'm not even gonna look because I know it's still pretty early. What were we talking about? Oh yeah, subscribe, like it, share it. We'll catch you on the next one. And another reminder, I'm gonna be doing the draw for my Samurai Brotherhood giveaway, which is this amazing handcrafted tanto knife. If you didn't catch it on the last video, I'm giving this away to one of my brothers. If you wanna get in on the draw, you just have to join the Samurai Brotherhood, which is go to my fan funding page, make a small donation, or become a monthly contributor, and you are automatically entered in the draw to win this gorgeous knife. And that draw will be 2 weeks from now, whatever that is. I'll obviously do a video and make a big ordeal about it, and somebody's gonna be really, really happy. It's gonna be great, so stay tuned for that. Till then, Samurai out.